Alright, so this is my second take here. First one got completely thrown down the drain. But anyways, here we are. We've got the ASM Hydrasynth, and we've got the Novation peak here. And so we're just going to do a little quick A-B comparison here to see what it's like to go through and make some basic patches on each of them. I'm going to try and make the same patch on each one, and it should kind of demo some of the differences in the workflow between the two. It's just going to be a pretty basic patch though. So first things first, let's just hear these two. Let's start up with the Hydrasynth. Cool, and now let's hear the Novation peak. Great, so that's the peak, and also my terrible piano playing. So here we go. Let's go ahead and start with an init patch on the Novation peak. So I'll hit this initialize button, and here we go. All right, so first things first, let's bring down the filter. And we're going to make a little bit of a plucky sound here with this first patch. So we've got this kind of instant button to do envelope depth here, which is real convenient. Alright, so that's not bad. We might play around with that envelope in a moment. But how about before we do that, let's bring in a second oscillator. So alright, get a little bit of a buzzing sound from it, because I guess they're not perfectly matched, but let's detune them anyhow. Cool, already have a nice wider, cooler sound that's phased. Alright, so now let's mess a little bit with the mod envelope here. The mod envelope comes in a kind of a weird setting by default. The sustain is not at 0, so I zero out the attack, bring the decay about here, and the sustain I actually want to bring down to 0, and we'll leave the release at about where the decay is. Make it a little less plucky. Yeah, you can kind of see the difference that bringing the sustain down has had. Definitely better that way. Let's also mess with the amp envelope to give it a little bit of a more plucky sound here. So instant attack, a little bit of decay here, and let's just bring the sustain actually down so we get a little bit of a volumizing effect. And the release can be whatever. Here's what it is. Cool, so that adds a little bit of a pop to the sound, which I like. I think that makes it sound nicer. Great, so maybe next let's throw in a little bit of resonance. Alright, it's getting harsh pretty quick, so I think maybe we'll actually, for this kind of a analog-y sounding patch, we'll jump over to the 12 dB filter. Cool, that's got that nice 80s-y sounding sound. And actually, if we want to take this a little further, there are voice settings to go in and do you know, unison detune and unison spread. But actually, sorry, I think what I want to look for is the oscillators, and we can do some diverge. So if I crank up diverge over here, yeah, they get pretty nastily out of tune, so we probably don't want that. But we could probably get a little depth to our sound. You know, actually, real quick for just demoing this, I'm going to sync the oscillators, or tune the oscillators. So then if I turn up diverge a little bit to like 25, already sounds better. Now if I go 40, let's turn up some drift. I still want to detune them to force it to sound good, maybe a little less. Cool, alright, so I think that's created a nice little sound there. I'm going to pop out of the oscillator menu, and now let's maybe jump into the FX section to start making this thing sound a little better. So first things first, always start with the chorus. Alright, that chorus just sounds the best on the peak. It's so wide. I mean, I could go to 100%. But I think at 100% it just kind of gets ridiculously wide, so let's bring it back down to something reasonable, 25%-ish. I mean, for some sounds that's going to make sense to go 100% on that, but I think this, we want to hear the original sound. So next let's head over to the delay section. We just turn the level up to like 25%. Not bad, that sounds pretty good. I kind of like to take it and just take the feedback completely down. So now you just kind of have one punch there, and then what I'll do is I'll jump over into the FX section, and I will head over to the delay and I'll change the left-right ratio, which is actually page 5, but not surprisingly I've done all this before in another take, yay! So cool, I'll switch the left-right ratio over to 1-2. Which kind of makes it sound like a ping-pong delay. All the other ratios don't necessarily have that effect, but this one I think is really great when you just take the feedback down to 0, just let it hit once on the left and right. Cool, that's sounding pretty good. Just make sure the laptop doesn't freeze. And the last thing to do here is basically crank in the reverb and see how that sounds. I think we'll switch over to reverb type 3, which is the biggest room size of all of them. And we'll bring this up to maybe 25% as well. And let's see. Yeah, that was up at 50%. I mean, I think the reverb on this thing is really great. I'd probably do something more like 30-35% here. Alright, let's jump on over to the Hydrasynth now, and let's swap it over to an initialized patch, and let's hear it. Okay, yeah, I mean, one of the things you can kind of immediately hear is that the release on their amp envelope is basically 0. It's dead flat. I actually kind of like that for the start of a patch, so I do respect that they did that. Some of their envelopes initial values are kind of silly though, but whatever, everybody always chooses ones that I don't like, so it's just tough being me. Alright, let's bring the cutoff down. Let's actually do a quick check. Okay, so it looks like the default filter that comes on filter 1 is a ladder 12 filter, so I think we're already set on the filter. So next thing's next, let's get the filter envelope going. Okay, sorry, here we go. I gotta go into filter and hit M1 amount, go up to like 30. Yeah, now the default for the envelope 1 is this big old square, so it's just always on 128 sustain, so we need to just bring that down. I think the filter cutoffs are just a little different between these two, because I have to bring the cutoff here a little below 12 o'clock, but whatever, it doesn't make too much of a difference to me to get that kind of closed sound though that I want. Alright, so jumping back to the envelope, now let's bring the decay out a little bit. Let's maybe go to about 160, 176 milliseconds. Cool, that's got a nice punch to it. Now let's also do the amp envelope. Let's go ahead and get that punchy amp envelope. Bring the decay to probably about the same, 100, maybe a little less actually, maybe 136 milliseconds. Bring the sustain down to like 80. But we gotta get that release. Ugh, that's annoying me now. Yeah, the release is pretty short on the peak, so let's leave it at like 96. Great, so now I think the next thing we got to do is we got to bring in a second oscillator. So we'll go over to the mixer section, turn up oscillator 2. Yeah, you can just hear that huge difference when you bring in the second oscillator on this thing. Because it's so digital, it's like perfectly matched to the first oscillator, and it literally just sounds like the exact same wave, but slightly louder, which is kind of cool. Now let's detune it just a little bit. I don't think there really is a way to do any sort of oscillator drift or whatever on this. There is a warm mode, so we'll crank that on in a second though. Okay, that's cool. That's sounding a little phased and fatter. Let's actually go ahead and hit up the voice menu here, which is where we do have warm mode, and let's hear that on. And off. Yeah, I mean, it totally brings up that low end, which definitely is helpful in sounding more analog. Okay, so the last thing I think we're missing here is a little bit of resonance. Yeah, to me that resonance just doesn't emulate the same level of analog crunch on the Novation peak. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I'm sure you can simulate anything in software, but it just doesn't sound as good, I guess is a better way of saying it. Okay, with all that said, I think we're ready to move on to the effects section of the Hydrasynth. So let's go over to pre-effects, and pre-effects is I think where we need to go for the chorus. So boom, chorus on, let's hear it. Yeah, that just doesn't have the same width and intensity that the chorus does on the peak. So I mean, I don't know, let me crank the rate. Does nothing. I mean, the dry wet on this is also 50% already, and the dry wet on the peak was at like 25%. But if I crank it up to like 80, I think it'll start to sound good. Alright, so it's not bad. It's definitely a little wider, but it's pretty weird that you have to crank this thing up to like 73%, whatever wet versus dry. Let's see if the depth has any effect. Nah, that just gives us that rate of whatever the heck it is, I don't know. Makes it sound tremolo-ified. Alright, so, I mean, to me that's about as good as you get out of this chorus. This is one of my least favorite parts of the Hydrasynth, is that chorus is just not great. Plus side, we come over here to the delay section. I think the delay is a little bit stronger here in the Hydrasynth. So I'm going to pop it over to pan delay because I kind of want to emulate that left-right ratio, and let's see. Oh, it comes, for whatever reason, this one is not initialized as at all wet, so let's turn it up. Alright, that is a little bit of feedback in it. What if we pull that down? The time's a little quick on that. Got some cool tape delay sound and stuff there. Let's compare that real quick. Alright, those sound about even there. If I crank the feedback there, this thing sounds great. I really do like the delay on this unit. And then last we come over to the reverb. This is just another area where I just don't think the Hydrasynth kind of stacks up to the peak. Maybe it has more going on settings-wise, not even really, but I just don't think it does as good. So let's turn it up to like 25%. The time is definitely not as far, so... Alright, so now that they should be just about the same, let's pop back to the peak. So switching over to the peak now. Cool, it kind of has like a little bit of punchiness and grittiness that's really nice on the attack of the sound. I really like that. Now let's jump back to Hydrasynth. I mean, it sounds good. It's just like a little bit of a flatter version. I don't know. I mean, if you jump into the envelopes, I think if you look around on here, you can mess with the curves and you could probably get it a little snappier. Let's mess with the same thing for the envelope here. Let's maybe adjust the time on those envelopes though, on the decay time, and raise it a bit. Okay, I mean, it's about as good as I'm getting it. I mean, I love that this has those envelope curves, though. You do not get envelope curves in the Novation Peak because I think they're analog envelopes, which kind of sucks, but at least they're pretty good envelopes. By the way, just to be clear, I've swapped over to the Peak now. Yep, sorry that I keep fucking hitting wrong notes left and right, but yeah, that's life when you're not good at piano. Yeah, so I mean, if you ask me, in this kind of a test, and this is not really what the Hydrasynth is particularly good at or designed for, the peak is definitely the winner here. I just think that the workflow is easier to get to a good sound and more inspiring. You have a little more knobs on the console itself. You probably have a little more depth on the peak, and also you have dual filters, which is pretty awesome. But, the peak also just has did I call this the peak? Hydrasynth. The peak also just has like a little bit of a better sound when you're trying to do things that are in its wheelhouse and not necessarily in the Hydrasynth's wheelhouse. Like, obviously, the Hydrasynth has some crazier wavetable features. This does have wavetables, of course, but I don't know. I mean, immediacy, total win for the peak, if you ask me. But, let me know your opinion. Okay, had to pause the camera to make sure that that whole video didn't explode and go down the drain, but now let's jump back in again and let's re-knit the patches on both of these things, and let's try a quick pad on both of them. So I'm going to knit the Novation peak. You know what, I guess this time, to be fair, we should go ahead and do the Hydrasynth first, right? Give it a chance here, so... Alright, there's our start. Now let's go ahead and set up the envelope first. I think that's pretty much going to be the most important part. Let's set up the amp envelope, pull the attack back. Hmm, 896 milliseconds sounds about good. Let's get the decay. We'll bring the sustain down to like 65. Let's get the decay out to like 640, 700. Of course, the release, we got to bring that up. Let's have that at about 832. I'm not going to go, that release sounds short, but I'm going to leave it kind of as is, because probably the effects will make it sound longer anyhow later, and I don't want to have to deal with any like clipping on the voices, because this thing only has 8 voices, so does this. They have the same amount of voices, but yeah, we don't want voice clipping. And I don't think the voice, whatever it is they call voice stealing, is not quite as good on the Hydrasynth. I kind of hear it more audibly, whereas Peak will be a little more clever about that. So anyhow, let's get about the same profile on the envelope here. I'm sure there's some clever way to just reuse the envelope, because I basically want the same exact one, but I don't feel like figuring it out, so I'll just copy it real quick. 704, sustain, 65.8. Well, actually for this, let's just bring it down to 0. And let's look at the release, pretty much the same thing. 704 is close enough. Oh, we actually haven't used that, so let's do env amount. Let's crank it up by like 30, and let's bring the cutoff down. You know what, actually, let's maybe leave the sustain up on the filter envelope a little higher. 50. By the way, you can hear those voices getting cut off in the background there, which is kind of annoying, but that's what it is. If we drown it with effects, it becomes a little less audible. I don't know, there might be some settings to kind of mess with the voice stealing here, but that's it. It just clips that voice right out. Cool, so with that done, I mean, we basically got that. Let's throw a little bit of resonance on it. Hair on it. So gotta clear that hair. That's important. Too much resonance. Cool. Well, of course, pads don't really sound good with without FX, so we're gonna drown it in FX. Let's crank on the chorus. We saw before that we probably need this thing at about 70 something percent. Let's just hear that for starters. Ooh, yeah, the top end on that coming through sounds actually really good. It sounds very brassy. I like that. Get some random luck when you're out here. Cool, so we're going to jump over to the delay now. And let's turn that onto stereo because, I mean, we're trying to get this thing as wide as we possibly can. Let's get it up to maybe like 35%. I don't know. Picking numbers. I think we had like 620 milliseconds. No, we had like 680 before, 660. That sounded really good. So let's go with that same thing again. But do feedback a little bit this time, but I don't want quite as much as it comes with by default. So let's hear it. Yeah, that voice stealing drives me crazy. Warm mode was off, so let's turn warm mode on again. Let's pop back out. Alright, honestly, it's driving me so crazy that just for the sake of this test, we're gonna lower the release on the amp envelope. Let's just pull it down to like 120, 192, I don't know. Alright, I mean, that's sounding pretty good. Let's throw a little reverb on it. Let's get that maybe to 35%. Time, definitely going to need to be more like 3 seconds. Let's go with cloud, whatever. I mean, it's not going to be apples to apples with these two things, so cloud seems like the best for a pad. Okay, not really hearing it come through too much. Let's go a little wetter. Let's go 50-50. Take that off, maybe it. Alright, I mean, it's definitely there. Let's try Hall again, actually. See what that sounds like. Hall sounds a lot better. I'm sure that cloud with enough tuning can probably be pretty good. Let's keep Hall for now then. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's jump back for 1 second, because let's bring in a second oscillator. I never even brought a second oscillator in. It may not be necessary with all those effects, but let's just hear it. Alright, it just sounds louder, so let's detune it. 11 cents. Definitely sounds a little bit more spacier and deeper and intense with that out of tune oscillator there, but maybe not hearing as much of the actual raw oscillator sound, so gaining something, losing something. Cool. Back over to the peak. Alright, let's get the envelope depth up. Yeah, we'll try to emulate the same thing, so we'll use the monenv. Here, let's copy kind of. So we have tack of like whatever. All right, here, you know what? Let's start with just the amp envelope, actually. Let's get a little bit of decay after that. A little bit shorter, though. And then a sustain somewhere around 50%-ish, a little over. Pretty good. Let's bring the release up just a little bit, though. Yeah, just for a demo, let's bring the release a lot up and let's see what the voice stealing is like on this. So the voice stealing is definitely there, but it definitely feels a lot less present, except for one time when I kind of smacked all the keys at once, and you definitely heard it a little bit. But I think it's a little bit better than Hydra. A little longer than that. Cool, next let's get the filter envelope going. Select the attack. We pretty much want to emulate like the exact same thing here. And we will bring the sustain up a little bit, just like we did on the other one. And a release like that. Alright, let's make it a little more depth to that. Alright, not bad. Cool, so let's start with the effects before bringing in that second oscillator. So this is apples to apples. Let's get the chorus. Let's go a little deeper this time. Sounding pretty good. Let's get the delay going, put a little bit of feedback on it. The initial time is pretty much fine. Let's go into that and just ping pong it. Get a little more going because it's a pad. Cool, sounding good. Let's get the reverb going though. Let's get a nice amount, go to the larger size reverb, and honestly we'll crank the time up. There's a whole lot of extra settings in the reverb here, but I'm not going to mess around with them. I'm just going to keep it basic. Definitely that reverb sounds a lot better. Let's bring in the second oscillator real quick. Oh, I think we skipped resonance, so let's turn up a little bit of resonance and put ourselves on a 12 dB filter. Maybe we need a little less envelope depth with that 12 dB filter. Ah, that reverb sounds so nice. All right, back to Hydra. Let's hear how it is. Oh, for some reason the volume's getting a little mismatched, so I'm going to turn Hydra up a bit. I mean, Hydra sounds really good. I actually really like its sound on the pad. It's definitely a lot closer. There's certain elements I like about the Hydra, and there's certain elements I like about the Peak, but definitely the FX section is like stronger and weaker on the Peak. Like what it does in the FX section is a lot better, but this obviously has a more powerful FX section, if that makes sense. Like it has more modes and things like that, but these effects are just really high quality, what they put on it. I feel like we just about covered it. That is our comparison of the ASM Hydrasynth and the Novation Peak. You decide what you like better.